What if the voice you hear when you're hardest on yourself isn't you? Not your personality, not your character, not your values or your beliefs. Jung spent 40 years studying exactly this, and what he found has a name, a clinical structure, and it shows up in the body before the mind even registers it. Once you understand it, you'll never hear that voice the same way again. In the early 1900s, Jung was working at the Burghölzli Psychiatric Hospital in Zurich. He designed what he called the word association test. Simple concept. He'd say a word, you'd say the first word that came to mind. Fast, no thinking. But some responses weren't fast. Some came with a hesitation, a change in breathing, a different tone of voice. The response came, but something had shifted in the space of a second before the person had any idea what had happened. Jung started mapping those hesitations. They always clustered around the same themes: shame, failure, abandonment, love, loss, always carrying what he called a feeling-toned quality, not just a thought, but a thought soaked in emotion, weighted by history, connected to something the person had never fully processed. He called these clusters complexes, and then he found something in the pattern that disturbed him. In his 1934 paper, A Review of the Complex Theory, Collected Works, Volume 8, Jung wrote, "Complexes are psychic fragments which have split off owing to traumatic influences or certain incompatible tendencies. Not formed, not chosen, split from the whole, like splinters from wood under pressure." And he said these fragments lead a separate existence in the dark realm of the unconscious, being at all times ready to hinder or reinforce the conscious functioning. At all times ready. Now here's where it gets strange, because Jung said something that no psychologist before him had been willing to say out loud. He said these fragments don't just sit there passively, they have personalities. Jung called complexes splinter psyches. Sometimes he called them little people. He wrote that they behave like independent beings, with their own logic, their own emotional history, their own goals. And he was specific about what they can do when they're activated. They produce emotions you didn't choose to feel. They surface memories you weren't looking for. They generate behaviors that, afterward, you cannot fully explain. You know that moment when you say something in a fight and immediately think, where did that come from? That's not a rhetorical question for Jung. It's a real diagnostic one. Where did it come from? Which part of you, and it is a part of you, just took the wheel? When a complex is activated, the ego doesn't disappear, but it steps aside, involuntarily, and something older, something more defended, something that formed in a context that no longer exists, speaks instead, with your voice, in your body, using your emotional history as its fuel. Here's the part that matters most for people who feel things deeply. Jung documented something in his clinical work that most people never hear about. He said complexes aren't only active in obvious moments of conflict, they run quietly beneath the surface, shaping what you reach toward and what you pull away from, without a single conscious choice. There's a pattern he documented specifically in empaths, caregivers, the person everyone calls when something goes wrong. It's sometimes called the helper complex. Here's what it looks like. Someone in your life is struggling. Before you've even decided to respond, something inside you has already mobilized. Body tightens. Thoughts organize around their problem. You start rehearsing what you could say, what you could fix, not because you chose to help, but because not helping feels intolerable. Jung's question, is that love? Or is that a complex managing its own discomfort through this other person? Because the helper complex doesn't care about the other person. Not at its core. It cares about the unbearable sensation of watching suffering and doing nothing. The helping is real, but the engine behind it has nothing to do with this moment. It has to do with something older. Something that taught you your safety depended on keeping the people around you okay. You felt that pull. The one that's bigger than a choice, and this is where it stopped being just theory for me. Jung didn't write about complexes from behind glass. he described meeting them himself. After his break with Freud in 1913, professionally isolated, personally in chaos, Jung entered what he later called his confrontation with the unconscious. During that period, documented in memories, dreams, reflections, and in the Red Book, he began having dialogues with internal figures that did not feel like his own thoughts. One of them he named Philemon, an old man with wings, appearing first in a dream and then recurring when Jung went inward. Jung wrote, "Philemon said things which I had not consciously thought. I observed clearly that it was he who spoke, not I." He was a trained psychiatrist, and he still couldn't say where those words were coming from. He spent years in dialogue with it, not to silence it, because he understood something most frameworks still resist. You cannot destroy a complex by refusing to acknowledge it. It goes underground, and then it runs you from down there. What Jung practiced instead was something he called differentiation, recognizing when the complex was speaking. And there's a specific question at the center of that practice. Is this feeling pointing toward my life right now? Or toward something that happened before this moment? Because a complex doesn't live in the present. It carries the temperature of an older wound. When it activates, the emotion is too big for what's actually in front of you. Or too specific, the kind that feels ancient, like you've been here before. Real emotion moves. It shifts as the situation shifts. A complex speaking feels frozen. You return to the same conclusion again and again. This always happens. I always end up alone. No one really sees me. Those aren't observations. Those are complexes narrating in first person. When you hear those phrases inside your own head, try the question, is this now? Or is this a fragment speaking from somewhere else? I was walking one of the Blue Ridge trails a while back. Ridge Trail outside Asheville. Takes about 40 minutes up, clear view on both sides. I was replaying a conversation I'd handled badly. Caught myself in a loop. You're too much. You ask for too much. You always push people away. I stopped, said out loud, I was alone, I could. Whose voice is this? Because I recognized it. The rhythm. The specific way it always started from the same place. That wasn't something I built. That was something I absorbed. A long time ago from someone who wasn't okay. I'd been carrying it without once asking whether it was actually mine. Just the question was enough to break the loop. Not permanently. These things don't break permanently. But there was a gap between me and that voice, and in that gap is where the choice lives. Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. The voice that isn't yours is still coming from somewhere inside you. It formed there because it had to. It protected something once, in a moment where you didn't have better tools. The work isn't to silence it. It's to know when it's speaking. And choose, in that moment, whether you want to let it finish the sentence. Sit with that one. Take care of yourself."